hopefully that they should be.
Governments of developing countries in Africa often lack the resources and infrastructure to solve the everyday problems of their inhabitants. But every so often, authorities and local entrepreneurs find low-tech solutions with the potential for being adopted across the continent. With me to discuss the importance of developing technological solutions for Africa's problem is Mark Obar, who is the digital producer and editor here at the Standard Group. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'll just start by asking you, so what is the importance of these technological solutions when it comes to developing Africa?
And now technology has been an accelerant. It has been very influential in mobilizing people and passing information, which is very critical for any development across the world, but particularly for Africans. Now that for a long time, Africa lagged behind, especially when it comes to the adoption of technology. It's very critical at the moment because some of the technologies that have been developed are now forming the basis of Africa's current development strategy, which is important to the general public and for development strategies.
What are these technological that are forming the basis of Africa's?
Okay, we can look at so many other things, but there are very specific frontiers in technological developments today, which cuts across the world. But particularly in Africa, we would look at big data, we would look at the internet economy, we would look at AI, that is artificial intelligence, basically, and then we would look at general production systems, which is mechanization of technology for production purposes, knowing that Africa does a lot of production as a basic economy, especially when it comes to things like industrial production, or farm production directly from the soil, which is the soil economy and all that. So particularly technology should be playing a major role in that. And this is also pegged on a declaration that was adopted by the UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, in September of 2015, that critically defined certain strategies and goals that each country has to employ to eradicate things like poverty as a goal, to eradicate things like zero hunger, eradicate issues to do with equality, education, healthcare, and all this. There were 17 important goals, but all of them have been narrowed down to one specific agenda, which is very much important: fighting poverty.
Right.
And so we would look at, in a wider spectrum, how technology comes into the adoption of technology, in the eradication of poverty generally.
We'll get to that, but do you think the Africa governments in general, are they doing enough to enhance technology in the continent?
Now, technology is steered by young people mostly, and I find it a bit tricky that most of the African governments have accommodated an older population than a younger population. That makes it very difficult for them even to understand the basic principles for the development of technology. Because if you look at it keenly, Africa is a consuming country. We just consume technology. We hardly develop. And even the ones that we develop are not steadily supported. If we develop a good one, it will be picked by some Silicon Valley technological company and be developed into something bigger. And actually that happened last week when, 2 weeks ago, when Twitter CEO went to Nigeria and found a nice application that had been developed and a system integrated to it. And then he said, okay, leave Nigeria, come and work with us in California. And that is what has been happening, especially whenever Africa develops a technology. So we need to look at it in terms of coming out as a consumer to a producer of technology, and also accepting the existing technologies in the world in terms of how we can remodify them to help us. And actually that is how China developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then do we need policies, unified policies in the continent, not just in different countries in Africa?
Yeah, and this, if you will talk about policies, especially when it comes to adoption of technology or the development of them, what I would maybe examine is the natural sense of Africa as a continent, which is made up of water, land, and air. And basically, our technological adoption should begin at that very basic level. Because, for example, we are suffering from very simple things that can easily be solved. For example, we talk about lack of water. while if you dig wherever we are standing, a few hundred meters down in the ground, you will find water, and it can easily be distributed by use of solar energy, which is readily available everywhere in Africa. So we can take your county, or my county, for example. I come from Obar Bay County, and in Obar Bay County, Obar Bay as a town sits on water, actually, basically. But the people lack water. They lack water most of the times. And that is a tragedy in Africa, not just in my county, but everywhere in Africa. But think about it. Adoption of technology or development of technologies that can easily pump that water by use of solar energy, take it to some hill, because most of them you find a lake, and then you find a flat ground, then you find hills. Pump it on top of the hill, and then use the technology to distribute it, to treat it up there, and then redistribute it across the entire county. That would be a great thing. So lack of vision and realization of certain policies that critically define the pattern in which a county or a people should take is very much important at this point, especially when it comes to development of technology.
So then how do we use technology in fighting poverty?
Now, how we use technology to fight poverty is to look at what is leading to this poverty, for example. And I'll go back to the basics to just make people understand. I will give an example. The people who are poor are everywhere in this country, for example, and are everywhere in Africa. But if you look at any station where they are, or any geographical location, there are some resources. The challenge has always been utilization of those resources and making those resources to reach everyone. So we have a lake, for example, in Lake Victoria, in Lake Turkana, Lake Nakuru, and all over, Lake Baringo, and all over. And all over Africa, for example, we have lakes, and people go hunting and gathering of fish, the traditional way, for example. But today we have technological applications that can easily concentrate fish in an area for maybe 6 months, and that fish will be around 1 kg, and you can sell it at approximately around 600 Kenyan shillings. If each family has got such aquatic farm, technologically enabled to apply to the population and technologically enabled to feed people and bring income to those people, poverty would automatically be eradicated. Now, when you give people resources, you give them potential. When you give them knowledge, you actualize that potential in people. Because now they will be using those resources to ensure that they can productively act upon the information they have to ensure that they can develop themselves. And that will deal with other aspects of these goals that the UN is trying to deal with. For example, issues to deal with education. They can now take their children to school properly and pay for that fee. They can now afford medical care. They can now afford housing care or housing plan and all that. And even the basic government structures like county governments can now come in and now say that we are creating a market system that can help us to harness this technology, harness these resources, and use them to ensure that we reach the potential of our economic empowerment as a people at the basic level. And that will change the entire continent.
But then how do you regulate the use of that resources? Because that resources will be being provided often and at a very faster pace. So then how do you regulate it so that it's not too much in the market at the same time?
Well, that's an important question. But we have over 7 billion human beings in this country. Around 2 billion of them lack food. So you cannot have enough resources, or you cannot produce enough for that population. It means that at any moment, for example, if you're producing sugarcane, you cannot lack a market to take your sugar. That is the basic principle. There is always a market for it. And that means that the much that we produce is as important as ensuring equalization system also within the society. Because by doing that, it means that the prices can also go low. And when the prices go low, it means that even the least person in the society can afford something. And that is also good for the general population, I think.
All right, as we wind up, there's the issue where it always comes up is that technology is taking over everything, which leads to unemployment. So then what do you do if the one thing that you're hoping will take you further takes away your unemployment?
What people refer to as employment in this sense is permanent employment like me and you employed at Standard Group to work. That is what people refer to. But people also don't look at the gains that this economy is doing in terms of expansion of the same employment capacity within that economic structure. So things like using a technology to pick tea pickers, the people who do it manually using hands, will claim that technology is taking us out of this. But you also need to look at it in terms of what is the value addition that we can now use from this technology to process our own tea locally, give it some sort of value addition, and sell it to the external market, right from a tea picker to someone who owns a business. So you need to look at it in a broader sense. But technology obviously will render some people
jobless.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark Obar, digital producer and editor here at the Standard Group. Thank you for joining us.